Hi, everyone. I'm Camille Mackler and talking today about something that's really difficult to navigate these days for anyone working with affected communities that are going through the enforcement landscapes, especially I'm talking about immigration, but I think this is a theme that probably resonates with a lot of people, which is how do you have difficult conversations when you're with immigrant clients, immigrant communities, and you're trying to explain the risks and the realities of this current moment? And I'm so happy to be here with Isadora Jaffe, senior staff attorney Catholic Migration Services here in New York City, whose law practice revolves around defending immigrants and their families who are facing removal from the United States. So, Isadora, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Camille.
And so, I'm just going to jump right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the hardest conversations you're having right now, and what does your prep look like going into these conversations with clients and colleagues?
Yes, of course. So, unfortunately, I think the most difficult conversation that immigration attorneys are having, and I mean all, even people who don't do what I do, which is removal proceedings defense work, even immigration attorneys going to affirmative USCIS interviews, the difficult conversation we're having is about detention and whether our clients or the people we're just giving legal advice to have a certain risk. And so that conversation I find even harder too when it's just a consultation and not one of our own clients. And when we're just giving legal advice and telling someone, you might have a risk at this upcoming interview. Those are very difficult conversations, especially because you might not be able to tell them much more other than they do have this risk and then these are their options, but not that you will be with them in the moment of detention or there to represent them.
And so, can you walk us through what it feels like, what it looks like when you're walking into a room right now? What's going through your head, before, during, after those conversations? What does that actually look like, feel like for you?
So, especially because it's so important if you're going to give someone bad news that you are as accurate as possible, and really have, the correct information in this changing landscape, you need to prepare. So, finding out as many facts about their case by asking them for documentation even before that meeting is a crucial way. Asking then, I think it's really important. All of us attorneys, whether you're an immigration one or not, you can find the immigration lawyer community is very friendly. Like, for example, all of us in the non-government immigration attorney field have listservs. I always, if I'm about to have a conversation like this, I go and I ask around and I try to find the closest analogy that I can. So I'm telling someone, this is what someone just like you uh, had happen. And I'm telling them as many examples as possible. And so I'm not just going off of vibes, which are very scary right now. One video that your person that you're having a consult has seen is probably all they have in their head, and they don't have the all the information about the people who go to court and they're totally safe. And so I think that is to make sure that you have the most accurate details. And so then after you've sort of done your preparation, really like listen to the person, hear all of their questions. A lot of people have, I have this conversation over and over about someone having a risk at an ICE check-in in a courthouse, and everyone still has different questions each time. And then the other thing that I really want to tell folks who are worried about detention risk right now is that they have legal rights even when they're getting detained in usually situations where they shouldn't be getting detained. The system's not following the law. So it's important to tell them, ICE, if it's true, had already vetted them, had already cleared them at the border. And then like if they were to detain them later, that by law, these are not actually legally sound detentions. And then to tell them that this isn't the end. Just because you get detained, you might be getting released. And for other difficult conversations that are not about detention, I still think, these same things apply where you want to be telling your clients, even if the government's not following it, that the law used to be different a few years ago, and that trying to give them some sense of this is a rapid change, and yes, you might be affected by it, but this is not like justice and this is not okay.
And how do you keep yourself on track in that conversation? I mean, is it hard to not lose yourself sometimes? And then I imagine they're pretty emotional, right? For a lot of different reasons. I'm sure it's hard for the client to hear. I'm sure it's hard for you to communicate, particularly when it's a client you've been working with for a long time. It's hard not to care. So, how do you sort of prep yourself for that?
So, yes, I always am a big fan of having an agenda, bullet points because, in my field, when I do a lot of cases, there a lot of them are based on clients' trauma, so they're getting emotional. I'm feeling emotional inside. I'm about to go on a tangent to address, to hear them and address what they're feeling, but at the end of the day, it's our job to make sure that they know the information because if something happens where they don't have access to counsel next, it's very important that you do get through everything you were there to say. So, of course, bad news is going to derail the person you're talking, but you need to be the one that is anchored with your list of what you need to tell them, and you'll be repeating yourself. They might have just started to get very emotional, and it wasn't exactly about like the legal advice you were giving in that moment. You're going to have to say it again. And I've had clients too, it's like I've told them the whole piece of bad news and then they're asking me at the end, did that is that really true, are you really sure? So you need to be able to not just go through something really quickly, but just be able to repeat yourself. I always tell clients that they should do another consultation in whatever amount of time makes sense. People sometimes are eligible for family or U visas, or their country has a revolution and, maybe even asylum. So I don't tell them, this is the last time, like this is it, and you have no legal options. I tell them if I'm saying you're not going to apply for something right now, to come do another consult either with us or somewhere else in a few years. If they are my client and I'm there and I'm giving them bad news, I try to show them all the advocacy I'm doing on their behalf. Just because they don't read English sometimes, you can have a translator on the phone, or if you speak, Spanish yourself, and just show them, especially since sometimes languages are a little similar and they'll pick up on a few words, show them exactly like the emails you sent to ICE where you were saying, I object to any detainment of my client or object to the ankle monitor you want to put on them. Show the emails you sent to the ICE attorney before the hearing saying my client suffered greatly and I don't think she should have to testify about this event. Remember that a lot of these folks like had to leave their own country because their whole government and police system would not protect them, and to have someone like you who they feel like is actually listening and fighting for them does give a lot of power and reassurance as they're going into these hard moments.
And something that's really standing out to me as I'm listening to you talk is it must feel, I mean, you and I both know because we've spoken to clients like this, they feel so helpless and defenseless. And neither one of those are exactly what I'm looking for, but it's so disempowering, right? I mean, you're just facing this Goliath of a government that is intent on doing as much harm to immigrant communities, frankly, as they can. I mean, they've come out and said it pretty clearly. And you said this, I think, in prep, and I want to tease it out a little bit from what you just said now, which is this idea of giving them some agency back, of seeing the fight, right? But also just seeing that through you, through your work, you are standing up and fighting for them, that there is somebody pushing back, that there is, even if the outcome isn't what's hoped for, or at least not immediately, that there's still that fight happening for them and giving them back that sort of sense of dignity and agency. I don't know. That's sort of what I remember you saying to me in prep and also hearing from it right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, the way that the system is treating these folks is, we can just confuse them with all of this overwhelming amount of bad policy, and then people are just going to leave anyway. So to say to someone, we're fighting for you to stay. These are the things I've done. You told me it's about your life and I put it here in this case. You gave me this article and here it is in this case. I mean, showing them that type of collaboration and that it's all caused, usually I try to tie it back to the heroism that they had, that like usually a lot of my clients are activists and they were trying to fight for a better country. For where they were born, and to show them like, I'm trying to tell this judge about all this amazing stuff you did, albeit now it's caused you to have to leave your country. I think they do get that dignity get back. They do get a feeling of like I'm being put in this light that is I'm not what I see in the media where I'm being villainized. I someone is showing, who I am and fighting for that.
And so we've talked about what this feels like in terms of knowing what we're about to say and how it's going to affect the client and what their reaction and the gamut that it can be from sadness and tears and overwhelm to even anger, right? Sometimes I would imagine you've also dealt with that. Yeah. But how do you to flip it a little bit because that's one half of the conversation, but you're the other half of the conversation and you have to be that person who's about to walk into that room or log on to Zoom or WhatsApp chat or whatever and say this thing that you know is going to be potentially very devastating and you need to be professional in that moment, right? I mean, that's your job. It's hard, it's never easy to give good news, but you're actually harming your client. If I'm sorry, it's never easy to give bad news, but you're actually harming your client by not giving them the bad news. Like, how do you approach that? How's that feel?
Well, first of all, I try to remind myself that even correct advice, when it comes across as bad news and not what someone wants to hear, it's still a gift and it's actually not happening often. So I tell the client that too. I say, someone else might ask you for $10,000 and say you should apply for this, but the reason I'm telling you and I don't charge anything for this advice is because I don't want you to do that because, that would put you in more danger. And there are a lot of notarios and there are a lot of private attorneys who don't even look at a case and, they'll apply for someone to have TPS in a country where they're not an eligible country for TPS and then they get in deportation proceedings. So I really come from that type of like, I'm not going to despair as I do this, going to like how I act in the moment and I don't get overwhelmed and emotional. I learned through my own training when I knew that I was going to have to talk to people in very vulnerable situations that comparing someone who's going through a bad situation at all and like relating them to your own experiences, you can do it maybe in your head, but you should not be doing this out loud because that's not what we're here for. And even with good intentions, I think that can absolutely backfire. I mean, we're here as licensed attorneys. Comparing yourself to a client who's coming to you in their worst moment of life is just I don't think it will probably help them in any sort of way, but it's also just not professional. What I would assume, because I see how much my clients really care about me, think about me, do so many thoughtful things, I think they would also start worrying about their attorney. And they wouldn't want to pressure you too much if they thought you were also going through a difficult time. It's hard, I think, but I don't think relating or saying like, when I went through this bad experience, this is what helped me. I don't think that that is should take place in these difficult conversations. It's okay to get emotional with your client. I think as long as again it doesn't turn into something where they have to comfort you. You can also, I think, notice if someone just really can't be having that conversation. They're just really shutting down and continue it a different way in another moment. And I think that in terms of taking care of yourself for that conversation or for having, doing this work and how to do it well and not burn out. If you can do this with another colleague, I think that's a good idea because if you froze in the moment, then your colleague can come in and also just having two people who are, explaining something difficult to you, it will go a long way. So I think that if you can bring, what I often do since I have a supervisor, I don't always necessarily bring him to the conversations, but I'll say I talked to my supervisor and he agreed with me on this or he had a case like this too. So I think backup is very helpful.
And we're both talking as attorneys, obviously, but I think a lot of these conversations are also falling on non-attorneys these days, staff of community-based organizations, even, council members, local elected officials, district office staff. I mean, a lot of folks are having these conversations with immigrant communities that they interface with or that they work with. And so just want to say I think your advice also applies to them, even though obviously we're talking about it as attorneys. So the last thing I want to ask, thank you, this has all been great. And just the last thing just to close is, it has to be said out loud that this was really hard and it's harder now, but it's been hard for a really long time. So how do you and your colleagues, like, how do you take care of yourself? How do you get through this so that you don't burn out and you can keep showing up? to do this work that we all care about and are passionate about, but that takes a real toll.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think solidarity is not optional for immigration attorneys
Hmm.
these days. I instantly kind of feel like this comfort of like having someone who knows exactly what my days are like when I'm around my colleagues, or I have a lot of friends from my immigration clinic in law school who also are all nonprofit immigration attorneys in New York City. I need to see them. Like I know like exactly when I will have a bad day, I often know, oh, if I'm going to have this trial with this judge who grants like this, it's not going to be a good day. I don't plan to just go home after that. I plan to see someone who will like just understand what I've been through that day, process it. I don't think it's good to recharge and be at home a lot, but when something really upsetting has happened for me, it's always been better to be moving around and, you know, being within nature so you can find some you won't be like the whole world is on fire, you see some beauty. But it's okay to also name like how difficult this all is. All of the people in my life don't think that my job is easy. They know that you
Hmm.
know, I have a very emotional and, hard job, and a lot of people show up for me even if they don't understand why. I think you can't be like a hero and do this work forever. You need to tell people that you need to be able to lean on your community so that when you go to have these conversations and give this advice about this bad news, you're able to be as solid as possible. Yeah, and so, it's great if you can find an office that will even support this. I will say I've heard my office is not the only one, but we do monthly vicarious trauma groups with a professional, and I know Brooklyn Defender Services has it as well. And I do think this is finally sort of getting to be a staple at organizations like mine.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And we're so grateful for the work you do. And I know your clients and community are too. So thank you so much, Isadora. This was really great. I will tag you. We'll be tagging you in all of the social media posts so folks know where to find you. And yeah, keep up the good work and keep taking care of your clients, but also keep taking care of yourself. Thank you.
You as well, Camille. Thank you.